how do you start a story? How should we start stories? And one of the important aspects of this show, at least for me, I know Caleb feels this way as well, is that we don't just talk about what a lot of other writing podcasts would talk about, which is just only technique. We want to be able to get into some of the things that go beyond technique, into why the human race enjoys storytelling so much and why they want to engage in stories. So that means understanding why audiences are moved by stories. It's not just about what you do, it's also about why you should do it. So Caleb, what are some of the implications of beginning a new story for our audiences? Why do audiences care about engaging in new stories, and what compels audiences to invest in those stories?
This is going to go back to one of our earlier episodes where we talked about what is a story. But I would say that the reason audiences care about engaging in new stories and what compels them to do so is that stories are enjoyable. They create pleasure, chemical pleasure in our brain to consume stories. They provide improvement. Stories make us better at living, which we also covered. Better at empathy, better at conflict solving. And stories offer meaning. Each story is we also said that behind each story, there's the question, which is, what does it mean to be human, or why live in the first place? And every story presents a theory on that. And I think that we collect those because we are looking for more meaning in our lives. So I would say enjoyment, improvement, and meaning are the main reasons people are always looking for new stories to consume.
Yeah, I have a lot of the similar notes because I bring this book up all the time. But if you are a writer, I do encourage reading at least the first part of this book, which is all about how the human brain is wired for storytelling, wired for stories, and how the human brain deals with stories. And even if you just read the first few chapters, you will begin to get a better understanding of how that kind of works for the human brain, which is what your audience is. Your audience is composed of a bunch of human brains. And so how can you tell a really compelling story? But I did a little extra research on this, and I've already clicked off of the website. Otherwise, I would like to give them credit for this. But they talked about the release of oxytocin, if I'm pronouncing that right, which is actually what allows us to empathize. And we empathize with the characters in the story, and therefore we want to act like the characters in the story. Just a lot of what you're already talking about. And just like you brought up, we talked about this a few weeks back. I brought this up too a few weeks back. You described stories as the idea of solving problems. A story presents us with a problem, and then we try to work that out. And I think that looks like a piece of the world that's wrong that we want to figure out a solution for. And so because the world is not as it should be, and I think this would be a good, interesting philosophical topic to get into, right? Like, do you feel like the world is as it should be, or do you feel like the world is not as it should be? And are you trying to fix it? Now, I come from a perspective that says the world is not at all what it should be. And therefore, this is why stories are so relevant, because the world is so full of problems that we all want to solve those problems, and we want to engage in stories because it helps us think through how we might do that. So I think that engaging in storytelling actually allows us to fight back against the imperfect way that the world operates. And I do think that because there are so many stories out there, I do think that we need to, as writers, focus on the stories that really mean something. So you just talked about that, like having stories that mean something. I think that is never more important than it is now, because there are far fewer gatekeepers than there were. It used to be that if you wanted a story published, you were almost certainly going to go to a publisher who had a printing press or who had whatever, and they were going to decide whether your story was worthy or not. Nowadays, you don't have those gatekeepers. You can go release any story you want to yourself. You just talked about, before we started the show, you were just talking about maybe doing some Kickstarters later in the year. I published a lot of my stories through the Reclamation Society, which is also run by me. So I have to figure out how to release those things. So if you're going to tell a story, figure out a way for that story to be really meaningful in some way, just like you talked about. It should have something that is deeply personal to you that you are wrestling with in a way to solve a problem for the world around you. Because people want to resolve conflict. We don't want to exist in conflict. We want to overcome conflict. And I think that would be really positive. So I think that's one of the reasons too, is like we're hungry for this release of going, my daily life. One of the most popular films out there was what was it? Contagion during the pandemic, right? Like it's one of the most popular. Why? Because there's a problem in the world. What is it? It's a pandemic. Okay, well, what do we do about this? And we go to stories to help us figure out like what might this look like and how might this get worse? How might it get better? How should I act differently based on these things? So stories are like ingrained in us. To be able to behave differently, to seek wisdom, to seek a way of doing things differently, a way to seek catharsis, a way to seek a chemical reaction in your brain without having to do drugs, right? Like these are the stories. This is what stories exist for. And so, I think you and I are in a lot of agreement on that. Anything else that you'd want to add to that?
I would just say that stories are relational. When you said oxytocin, so that's the hug hormone. When you touch someone or get a hug, that oxytocin is what's released in your brain. So stories are having an effect on your brain, like getting a hug from someone. It's a relational act. Yeah. And that's not. There are other reasons: the empathy, mirror neurons, all of that sort of stuff. But we are relational beings. And I think we're more aware of that this year than we have ever been before. I had the 20th introvert this summer tell me last night, like, I was good for 3 or 4 months and now I just miss people. Like we're aware that we are relational beings and in a way that we took for granted before. And stories are one of the ways that we feed that.
Yeah, that's well said. And we're always engaged. I mean, oral storytelling is one of the most original forms of storytelling, and we do that just naturally. We tell. I will tell you that if you can go find a YouTube video of Jamie Foxx telling any story, you will be just sucked into whatever world that he's creating. My wife and I clicked on a YouTube video yesterday. It was recommended to us, and it was him talking about what he learned from working with some of the different actors that he's worked with, or some of the different directors that he's worked with. It was like a round table from the Hollywood Reporter, actually, if you want to go watch it. And here's Jamie Foxx and just talking about a few things, and is able to just draw you in via oral storytelling to going like, wow, I did not think I would be interested on Christoph Waltz's way of looking at a piece of paper, but Jamie Foxx made that one of the most relevant things I've heard today, right? And so we tell each other stories all the time, and those of us who really enjoy that process are constantly doing that so that we can derive understanding from other people and create shared experiences. And I think that's all just super, super cool. It's one of the reasons why I love storytelling.